father's side, they came from the Basque country in Spain, through the Canary Islands, migrated into Belize, and then into Cuba. On my mother's side, they came from the Basque country as well, but they migrated directly into Mexico. I do want to mention that my grandfather, my paternal grandfather, Maximo, was an officer in the Cuban Army. At the time it was the War of Liberation from Spain, in which Teddy Roosevelt became famous with his charge in San Juan Hill. They, on my father's side, they moved to, from Cuba to Key West, Florida, where Dad was born as a first-generation American. He then went to Spring Hill, and it's interesting because Spring Hill was the closest college to Key West, and a lot of people from Key West were educated in Spring Hill. And from Spring Hill, he went to Georgetown, where he got his law degree. On my mother's side of the family, as I said, they migrated directly into Mexico. And my grandfather, Jose, was a rancher. Dad, after he got out of law school, was in the Depression Recession era. And he got a job as a landman for Gulf Oil Corporation, which then had a lot of oil properties in the area of Tampico. He met Mother in a town called Tuxpan, in the town square, and they fell in love and they married. And she became the corporate counsel for Gulf Oil Company in Tampico. And we were there for many years. We were born and raised there. We lived on the bluff, and below the bluff was a beautiful lagoon with the mountains in the background. And as kids, we had the freedom to do what we wanted, so we would go down the bluff, and I had a little rowboat, and I would do some fishing and hunting, and just a free childhood experience that today is, of course, prohibitive because of all the problems. I went to a military school, which is known as a kind of a reformatory school, in Kerrville, Texas, named Schreiner. And I love those people. I really liked it there, but Dad wanted me to have a better education, so he sent me to Lawrenceville School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. Lawrenceville School is the preparatory school for Princeton. And different from the Schreiner rough and tumble guys there, the people at Lawrenceville came from very rich families, very intelligent Northerners whose culture and way of relating was foreign to me, so I didn't particularly appreciate that. But anyhow, I stuck it out. Graduated from there with minimum grades. I went to my counselor to see if I ought to go to Princeton, and he said, with your grades, you'll be lucky if you get into any university. So I ended up going to Tulane University, which at that time was a play school, and they would admit everybody. I stayed at Tulane for 1 year, and then Dad, my general, decided to send me to the University of Virginia. So I went to Charlottesville, Virginia, and majored in political science. I got my degree in that. And then I went to law school in Virginia, and I did too much partying, and as I was telling Tim, I think I had a 50% attendance record and was asked to leave. So then, before Dad murdered me, I got me admitted to Tulane University in New Orleans, where I ended up getting a law degree. In the course of of the law school, I met Katie Pollard. We fell in love. We married. She's from Crowley, and her parents were beautiful people. She was an only child too, and she was a beautiful girl. So I met Katie, and we got married in my probably in my beginning of my senior year. That was during the Korean time, and I tried to enlist in the Naval Air Force, but my eyes were so bad, and then I decided I didn't want to be a grunt in Korea, especially in the winter. So I joined the ROTC and proceeded on to the ROTC course until I got my law degree, and then I was given a second lieutenant. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, and served 6 months active duty in Virginia, Williamsburg, near Williamsburg, Virginia. And then the war in Korea wound down, so I was then sent into the reserves, where I served for 7.5 years. From the Army, I went to work as a law clerk for the Orleans District Parish Court. There were 6 lawyers, 6 judges, and our office was in the old Wildlife Building, right down in the center. My co-clerk was Pascal Carragero, who later became Chief Justice. And through Pascal, I learned some of the politics of New Orleans. I met Moon Landrieu, who was a friend of his, and Jerry Federoff, and all those guys. So I got to know a little bit of the New Orleans politics. After I finished my year there, I went to work for Lemley and Kelleher, big law firm in New Orleans. And after being there a year, Katie's father found out that there was an opening here in Lafayette with the Davidson, Moore, Honorbain, and Donahoe firm. So I joined them as a 6th member of that group, and I was being paid $300 a month. I thought I was fortunate to get a job, so I didn't question the money. At that time, the law was really a profession. You were in the and you practiced law for the law, and not for the business. So that your primary focus and your primary value was the profession of law, and not the business. Okay, so then, after 3 years there, I was asked by Charles Bailey, who was then with the Bailey brothers. They were oil and gas guys here, and Charlie put a good word for me with Phillips Petroleum Company in Bartlesville, and asked me if I wanted to go be corporate counsel for them in Venezuela. Of course, I wanted to follow in Dad's footsteps as a corporate lawyer, so I said sure. So I got my wife and 3 kids, my boat, my lawnmower, my guns, and I moved them all to Caracas, Venezuela. Started our own firm, Honorbain, Donahoe, Bernard, Twain, Diaz, McNamara, and Naval. So we practiced there, and I want to say I had the honor and privilege of practicing with Joe Honorbain, who was one of the finest gentleman professional lawyer that I ever knew. He was very considerate and very generous, and he taught me the principles of professionalism, generosity, of caring for people, and he would bring us into the fold as partners and share in the profits. So he was my mentor, thank heavens, for many years. At that time, Lafayette was primarily a railroad town. Railroad, agriculture, very little manufacturing. Oil and gas hadn't developed. your oil and gas center at that time was in Lake Charles. That's where Lisco and Lewis got their start. Around the 1970s, Bob Wright got the great idea to make drilling crew members on drilling barges seamen. So he started that jurisprudence. And slowly but surely, then the maritime industry started here, offshore and whatever. So then we had John Allen Bernard started specializing in maritime law. So we tried maritime cases and had the pleasure of and the experience, beautiful experience of trying cases both in federal and state courts in Mississippi and Texas. There were 3 judges, Judge Alfred here, who was a sweet man, but the greatest procrastinator I've ever known. Then you had Judge Hoffbauer in Crowley, who was tough as nails, and you had Judge Putnam, a state court judge in Abbeville. Those were the only judges. They handled criminal, family, you name it, they did it. In those days, I might add, it was primarily judge-tried cases. Juries were very seldom used, I guess because it costs a lot in state court. So we were primarily trial lawyers. Well, when maritime came about, of course, then we had the jury system. You had to learn how to be a jury trial lawyer. And I attended a seminar in New York by the head of the New York Transit System, who put on a week seminar on jury trial lawyers by himself in front of 15, there were about 15 of us. And he's the one that gave at least me the insight of how to become a jury trial lawyer. And that was very interesting. And his principal thought was, be yourself. Don't try to imitate anybody. Because if you don't, the jury will find that you're not being fair with them, and they'll give it to you. So, back in 1969, there were 2 death cases that occurred offshore, and they were consolidated, went up on appeal, and then consolidated in front of the Supreme Court. Lee Leonard was one of the lawyers involved, Smitty Landry, and they asked who wanted to argue before the Supreme Court. I said, well, I'll do it. And they were kind enough to do it. So we went up to the Supreme Court and were admitted by the then Attorney General in his frock coat, and that was neat. So we went to the clerk of the Supreme Court, and we wanted to introduce an exhibit at the last minute. Now, you understand under the rules you have to submit them a month in advance. And the guy says, I'm going to admit it. He says, where are you guys from? He says, Lafayette. I said, where are you from? Baton Rouge. Well, okay. So he let me introduce the exhibit. So we came in, and we were the first case, and here come all the Supreme Court judges, like the like in the Wizard of Oz, you know, we were in all. And I remember my knees were shaking. And then the Chief Justice said, in this imperious voice, who filed this exhibit? I said, oh. So then I had to get up and get chewed by the Supreme Court Justice, which was very humiliating and frightening. The law was not clear as to what law would apply offshore, especially outside of in federal waters, especially in these platforms. The plaintiffs in that case were arguing that maritime law applied because their clients had been negligent, partially negligent in causing the accident, and at that time you had contributory negligence in Louisiana, so that would have been the end of their case. So we argued for state law, and the Supreme Court justices paid no attention to each side, and they decided it was federal law that was going to apply, and then federal law would choose whether it's state or federal law depending on the facts of the case. So neither one of us won on that fight. So we, and that was the only time I went to Supreme Court. I went before the Louisiana Supreme Court several times, and courts of appeal. And Mark Twain, one of his statements was, the two most important days to your life, the first one is the day you're born, and the second one is when you find out why. And I thought that was great. I can't tell you the year I found out why, but I found out that that God sent me here to serve Him by helping people and His creations. And even though I haven't just the best disciples, I've tried. So I want to say that, serve the Lord.